growing company in the United States by Inc. magazine. This is because they offer the absolute lowest prices in the industry and follow up with over-the-top customer service. So what are you waiting for? Go to sdbullion.com today and join more than 60,000 happy investors that save money on every precious metals purchase they make.
Hey everyone, this is Elijah Johnson with SilverDoctors.com, and back with us today is Jim Willie, editor of the Hat Trick Letter found on GoldenJackass.com. Jim, thank you so much for joining us back today. Just 1 week after our interview, we had an amazing response from our interview, and we had so many questions we didn't get to. We wanted to get to the ones we couldn't. So thank you so much for joining us once again, just a week after we had you last on.
Oh, it's a pleasure being on again, and I don't mind at all that it's rapid fire. I do enjoy the question and answer sessions a bit more than the outlined, scheduled talks. When people ask questions, it's just very relevant, and I enjoy it. It's kind of like office hours when I was a teaching assistant back in graduate school, Carnegie Mellon. Sitting in the office and doing some work, and people flow in, and they've got questions from every which corner. It was a lot of fun.
Definitely, and I'd like to start off with a question about precious metals. They want to know, when you order silver, gold, or other precious metals, do you think some bad guys see your order and target you? What safe places are there to store what you buy?
I don't think we have to worry about things like that. If you're going to buy, $86,000 worth of monster box silver coins, yeah, and you're carting it out with two friends and you're making 3 trips to the car, yeah, you might attract some attention. But if you're buying, 30, 40 coins and you got it in a backpack or in a satchel or in your pocket, if it's only, say, 15 coins, wrapped in a bag or something, I don't think you need to worry. I don't. My gosh, do we worry every time we exit a bank? I don't. I do look over my shoulder to see if there are maybe a couple guys holding knives. I mean, strange thoughts like that. I had a friend back in 2015 exit a bank. No, before entering a bank, had $3,000 stolen in front of a bank here in San Jose, Costa Rica. I wouldn't worry about things like that. Just do your thing, make your purchase. The bigger danger, if it's a danger at all, is having to fill out the forms, the disclosure forms, like say at a coin dealer. But even that is kind of minor. I've got a very good friend from years who told me, I don't like to buy very many silver or gold coins. I would much prefer having my bank account. And I said, well, what bank do you like there in Dallas? And he said, well, to tell you the truth, I like the big banks because they're bigger and safer. And now he's got something like $100,000 savings account, and he's only got about a third of that in gold and silver. And I said to him a few weeks ago, you got your big Wall Street bank. He didn't tell me what it was. I think it was Citibank. I'm not sure, but in Dallas. And I asked him, do you feel a little awkward that you've got so much money in a big bank that it might get bailed in? And he said, no, I don't think so. I said, well, you're more concerned about the paperwork of buying gold coins than you are your Wall Street big bank account. And he said, yeah, I know. I just don't think there are going to be any bail-ins. The risk right now is not for being followed and robbed or anything like that. I think the risk is that we're just going to be sitting on gold and silver for a while, not realizing the gains until suddenly, bang, we get huge gains. The risks are are with having a big bank account and not being aware that so many of the biggest banks are insolvent. What safe places to store it as a trusted place for gold and silver? I'd put it in your own basement unless it's a huge amount. I'd hide it with an old piece of furniture. I'd cover it with some old blanket. I'd make it look like a pack rat item that no one gives a damn about. Unless you've got a huge amount. And don't tell people, don't show people what you have in your basement. It's your private. It's for your best friend or your brother or your father to know. It's not something that you have a party and you say, hey, let's all go on downstairs and take a look at my collection of monster boxes. I got 4 of them. And you don't do things like that. As for vaulted places, Hong Kong is still the best place for a vault. They have an airport location and they've got a tremendous amount of capacity there. They don't like to talk about their available capacity. There are a few excellent places to store. There's a fellow named Mark O'Byrne, an Irish fellow with both a Dublin and a London office. And his storage firm is called Goldcore. He's excellent. I've actually talked with him a few times. It's been some years, but we had some long talks a few years ago. A great guy. A tremendously coincidental event took place. I was traveling in Nicaragua, believe it or not, at a hotel in 2013 or so, and I bumped into a woman, and we just got talking, and I told her, well, I've got some Irish background, and she said, oh, I'm Irish. You couldn't tell my accent? I said, what's your name? And she said, Catherine O'Byrne or something like that. I said, O'Byrne, golly, there aren't too many O'Byrnes. Do you know Michael? And she, Mark, do you know Mark? And she said, it's my brother. So I bumped into Mark O'Byrne's sister when I was in Nicaragua at an obscure little hotel. So anyway, the safe places to store are not many. The bigger it is, the more I distrust it. Okay, that's fine. Let's move on to the next question.
Now, Kelly from Salt Lake City, Utah, is wanting to know, is it still your prediction that the U.S. dollar will rise, and rise some more, then vanish?
No, it's not. And I'm not really embarrassed to say that. I'm adapting to the changing world and fast-moving events. Here's what I think will happen now. The dollar has risen, and caused tremendous problems across the world. By rising, other currencies have fallen. Now, I'll give you an example in the, I call it the second and a half world. In the Dominican Republic, they don't do narco trafficking favors for Washington and New York, and therefore their currency suffers whatever vagaries happen. Their Dominican peso has fallen about 35 or 40%. I'm talking about the last 3 or 4 years. I know this intimately because I know a couple of women who have family there, and their food prices are really up. Okay. Brazil, not a third world nation, probably second world, BRICS country. Their currency is also down at least 30%. So they have food price increases. They're self-sufficient to a large extent. And that's a key question when it comes to currency issues. Do you produce your own food? Because it's not subject to the currency swings. But a lot of these countries are not totally self-sufficient when it comes to hardware and housewares and pharmaceutical products, medicines, just basic things like, shaving devices Gillette, you name it, car parts, tires, things like that, across the board. So they have problems. They have increases in prices. So here's what I think is happening in response to a global currency crunch for many countries. And that, by the way, does not include Europe. Right now, Europe, with their euro, is seeing an increase in their currency. So they're getting vagaries of a different kind. They're seeing export problems. Their export industries are under more strain because their currency is higher. Germany is now experiencing some minor strains for their export trade. Okay, so it seems like the United States and Europe both have the high currencies, and the rest of the world is having some difficulty, challenges on the currency front with import prices and food prices. In response to all this, the Chinese have developed a number of non-dollar platforms, and this is really an accelerated program and initiative that has come since the Ukraine war in February of 2014. So here we are 4 years later into the Ukraine war. We get another permanent U.S.-led war, scorched earth, U.S. constant ugly war scenario. This is what the United States is all about. Find an area, destroy it, create a scorched earth, interrupt Asian influence with the rest of the West, and just keep the military contractors funded, the service contractors funded. Gold goes missing at the country. This is what the United States legacy has become in the modern era in the most recent decades. Add Libya to that, add Syria to that, add Yemen to that. It's just all over the place, and it's disgusting. So as a result of these non-dollar platform responses by China, the United States finds itself with London and Brussels at its side, its obedient fascist side. They find themselves in a position where they cannot oppose China and the non-dollar platforms. I'm referring to the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. I'm referring to the cross-border interbank payment system, also called the Chinese interbank payment system, a rival to SWIFT, bank-to-bank transactions. I'm referring to SCO, the Shanghai Cooperative Organization. That's not exactly an economic or construction conference, but it's important for bandying together for security and cultural purposes. But the big item is the Belt and Road Initiative, One Belt, One Road. The Chinese, it's a cornucopia conference. There's up to now $6 trillion worth of projects. These are all non-dollar. And on top of all that, all the non-dollar platforms, there is the Rosneft oil consortium, the Russian giant state-owned oil company, which has contracts with Iran, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, talking to Mexico and other countries. And it's going to be for pooling the oil reserves and selling them outside the dollar. And Russia will take care of things like the contamination and viscosity mixtures and all that. Okay, so with all these non-dollar platforms for construction, for investment, for infrastructure, for oil mixture, and a new cartel that will bury OPEC. OPEC is now insignificant. It's the Russian Rosneft oil consortium that matters. That's a new oil cartel. What we've moved toward now is a dual universe. The United States cannot undermine all this significant, critical mass, non-dollar activity with numerous platforms, numerous channels, and 100 countries. I believe all these non-dollar platforms and activities for projects, etc., have formed the core of the Eurasian trade zone. So what we've come to now is a dual universe where the king dollar is the Western currency reserve standard, and the RMB has become the Eastern currency reserve standard. Case in point is Russia and China. They completed their gigantic network of oil pipelines. It took them about 2.5 years, 3 years. It's all done. They started it in 2015. It's all done. If it's not all done, it's 90% done, and ancillary sidebar channels are in the planning stage. Okay, all that Chinese Russian oil commerce, all that trade is done in RMB. Okay, so in the East, they already have their Petro Yuan standard, the Petro RMB standard. They already have it. And it's been going along now for a couple of years. It's not brand new. The United States cannot stop this. So instead of the dollar vanishing, the dollar is going to tolerate the RMB development in trade and banking. They can't stop it. The dollar is not going to vanish. The dollar is going to allow the RMB now to compete. And with this competition, you're going to see the Chinese gain ground everywhere. They're going to gain ground, for instance, with Saudi oil purchases. They're going to be done in RMB. They can't stop it. They're going to see progress with Iran. Iran is now pretty much a member of the Eurasian trade zone. They call it the Eurasian Economic Union, yet another EU. I just don't like these names. I call it the Eurasian Trade Zone. So much better name for ETZ. No confusion with EU being the European Union. No confusion with EU being the United States. It's États-Unis in French. EU. It's Unión. No, how you say United States? Estados Unidos. EU in Spanish. Okay, so the dual universe is now well along. This is not early stages. It's like middle innings of the tolerance between the United States dollar system and the Eastern RMB system. Next comes the RMB oil and gold futures contract triangle in Shanghai. For those who think it doesn't matter much, you're dead wrong. The Chinese are buying oil from Russia, paying RMB, and the Russians are converting a portion of that in Shanghai with gold directly. In other words, the oil for gold trade is on with Russia and China. The dual universe is going to be a very big concept. The United States must tolerate China or go to war. We're seeing the effects of trade war not going well. The United States is doing stupid things. Every foreign policy initiative since 9/11 has been a grand, if not grotesque, failure. Two cases in point regarding trade friction with China. The United States has done aluminum and steel tariffs and slapped them on China. China has turned around and canceled a grain deal and now signed on with Russia, a multi-billion, multi-year grain deal. China canceled a soybean deal with the United States, turned around and signed a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar Brazilian soy deal. So wherever the United States tries to apply its muscle, it loses enormous commercial deals in trade. Okay, so it's not going to vanish, the dollar. It's going to tolerate the I don't want to call it a rebirth, the growth, the sustenance, and the development of the RMB currency. And later down the road, when China, when China introduces the gold trade note built atop the Shanghai contracts, the gold trade note will be important in commerce for trade payment, which will further displace the U.S. Treasury bill. When China makes further progress, they're going to introduce a gold-backed RMB. and that will accelerate the decline of the dollar, even in the West. Okay, so let's move on.
Now, Daniel is wanting to know, as we see this decline of the dollar, what do you think will happen to mortgages and other debts?
This is a point of extreme interest and curiosity. It is impossible to know exactly how this is going to turn out. We have to look at past precedent. Let's look at 1993. We had the Mexican, it's often called the tequila crisis. The Mexican peso had a severe devaluation. I don't have the exact figures, but I think it was something like 30%. In Mexico, the same issue was brought forward. And in Mexico, what they did was they protected their big banks. The big banks, if there was a new valuation for the peso and everything was kept the same regarding mortgage contracts and car loans and other additional, backed loans, even personal loans, I would believe. If nothing was stated, then with a devalued currency, people could have used the cheaper inflated peso currency to pay off their fixed amount on their loans. And it did not work that way. What the Mexican banks did in 93 was to increase the loan amount by the devaluation, inverted. And it meant that they had the cheaper inflated pesos, but they had to pay off even more on their loans. Okay, if they had done nothing, the banks would have been left vulnerable with those losses. It would have been an immediate 35% loss across the board on all their loan portfolios, their entire loan books, their portfolios, even the commercial loans, company to company, or bank to big company. Therefore, this question can be rephrased. Will the banks do nothing and absorb the entire loss from currency revaluation? And I say, hell no. When have they ever done that? So if the United States launches a new currency and it's devalued out of the gate, look for the loan balances across the spectrum within the U.S. banks to increase on their loan amounts. The loan volumes will grow. They will respond to the devaluation. If they don't, it means the banks absorb instantly an enormous multi-billion-dollar loss. We don't do things like that in the United States. The banks take care of their own. Wall Street is running the U.S. government, along with Langley at its side. So this is a CIA Wall Street government running the United States. Do you really think they're going to absorb the entire loss from a currency devaluation upon any introduction of a new currency for the dollar? It's folly to think that they're going to absorb multi-billions in losses. Next, let's move on.
Now, just my question here about the mortgages in Puerto Rico and the debts. When they revalued the mortgages, right, added the 30% on, what about the depositors in the bank? Because it's really their money, right, that the bank loaned out. Did they get a boost, or did they have to suffer the inflation?
Well, let's be a little bit more accurate. In the 1960s, 70s, and most of the 80s, that point was true. In the 90s, 2000s, and 10s, banks don't lend out depositor money. Banks borrow from the Fed and lend fresh new money. So what's going to happen to depositors? I don't know. I'm guessing. I don't have a great answer here. I'm guessing that if a depositor has $100,000 sitting in the bank, there'll be a forced conversion. And I really doubt it'll be favorable to the depositors. I think it'll be seen as an opportunity to hoodwink the American citizens who have bank accounts and to earn their resentment and anger and disgust with a bank policy that will not be favorable to them. I don't have it all worked out. We've never seen a launch of a new dollar in the United States where the dollar has been floating internationally. I think we're going to have $2, an international dollar and a new domestic dollar. We're working in that direction right now. So if there's a 30% devaluation, the old dollar holders in the United States should be given 30% more of the new dollars. But you just watch. I'm pretty sure you're going to see a forced conversion. And I don't know that they're going to get anything extra. It might be 1 for 1. You have to look at some, gosh, you can't even look at Europe with the euro forced conversion, because that was done according to formulas for the 13 nations. And there was no bickering or complaint about confiscation and bad conversions. But in the United States, what they're probably going to do, this is my best call. What they're probably going to do is to say there is no devaluation. There's just a new dollar. So it's going to be a 1-to-1 conversion for depositors. And then within 3 months, they will have realized their bold-faced lie, and they will do a devaluation. So people will not get a benefit from the devaluation. They'll get a lie and a 1-to-1 conversion, and then there'll be 2 back-to-back 30% devaluations, which will essentially be 50%. And for those who think that math doesn't work out, if you do a 30% devaluation, you're preserving 70. You do it again, you preserve another 70 on top of that, and you're left with preserving 49%. There's your 50. So expect that depositors will get screwed in the form of a lie and a delayed reaction, a delayed action on the devaluation process. The United States has already worked out a deal. This was something back in 2015 and 16 the Chinese demanded that the U.S. government issue a new dollar and devalue it 50%. And the Americans said to them, how would it be if we issue a new dollar and then shortly afterwards have 2 30% devaluations? And the Chinese and the Americans shook hand on it. Why would China be in a position to make a statement and dictate policy? Well, easy. They're the biggest creditors. At the time, they held something like $2 trillion worth of U.S. treasuries. Now, both Japan and China hold about 1.0 trillion. The Asians control our debt, and we're now at trade war with our creditors. How stupid are we? Next question.
Now, this one is from Rick, and he's wanting to know, can you talk more extensively on the state of retirement benefits and student loans? How fragile and how reliable are they?
Okay, when you say the state of retirement benefits, I think you're talking about the pension funds. And I don't know if you're talking about the state-run pension funds, as in Social Security, or the corporate-run pension funds, which are all privately handled. I'll try to give an answer for both and get to student loans in a few minutes. First of all, Social Security. Let me give you an example of what happened to me. In November, I applied for Social Security after having turned 65 last May. Okay? I filled out my application in the first week of November. In the first week of December, they said you need to fill out an additional form having to do with foreign income. So I did so. A month later, they informed me that they never received it. So in early February, I conducted a query to locate what I sent to Delaware in December with the DHL tracking number. And they told me in 10 days I would get some response officially as to finding that form and putting my application for Social Security on track. They've not found it yet. So here I am, December, January, February, March, 4 months into my application, and there's nothing but dragged feet, bureaucratic bullshit and nonsense. Okay, that's Social Security. So the eligibility and access is delayed through foot dragging and bureaucratic BS. I expect eventually they're going to cut benefits, even though as of January they increased it by 2.0%. And I thought, oh, yippee, that's great. I'll get more. I haven't gotten anything. So I think this is intentional. I think they're going to increase the eligible age, reduce the benefit, and maybe go to means testing on Social Security, which means if you got a big net worth, you might not get anything, or you get a small amount on Social Security on your monthly benefit. I'm looking for anything from the tens of thousands that I pitched into Social Security during my 25, 27 years of career. Now, private pension funds. My gosh, I started covering this in 2015. The Central States Pension Fund. It's for truckers, Teamsters, and a lot more. Well, they've cut their benefit in half. And it's all in the news. It's not a big secret. It's not possible. It's done. They cut their benefit in half. They're talking about new additional contributions. They're talking about new additional obstacles for collecting. In other words, raise the eligibility age. They have now suffered, instead of having 10 contributors for every beneficiary, retiree drawing on the benefit, they have about a 3-to-1 ratio, which does not work. Okay, then you've got CalPERS in California. They're having extreme problems. They've got a bunch of bonds that are non-performing, of bonds of all types that are not performing. They're not getting their interest on the nut, as you call the core holdings. And they're talking about reducing the benefits. And they had better start talking soon about increasing the eligibility age. So I'm hearing from clients that the Texas Teachers Union is doing reasonably well. It's not suffering mightily at all. Because I lumped them together, and I had some Texas clients say, Jim, you got to watch what you say about the Texas Teachers Union, because it's not in the same dire straits as California. Those Californians do a lot of stupid things, as we all know. And they did exactly that with their CalPERS pension fund. Oh, my goodness. It just goes on and on. The Chicago pension system is all a mess. I think it comes down to three things with the private pensions. They're going to reduce the benefits, they're going to raise the age for eligibility, and they're going to increase the amount of contributions going in from the very few remaining people who are employed. Okay, if we had a sluggish recovery and the economy had positive growth, these pension funds would not be suffering like they are. They're proof positive of lies coming out of Washington regarding the economy. All right, now for student loans. We're up to about $2 trillion now in student loans. We've had surveys where over 40% of the students who have loans actually stated that they expect that there will be bailouts for the student loan sector, and they won't have to end up paying off their student loans. There's an interesting phenomenon going on now. Students talk to each other. they realized that for 5 years there have been very, very few jobs. When I got out of graduate school in 1980, I got 4 job offers with a doctorate in statistics, which is pretty attractive. Right now, if I were exiting, I might get one offer. It might not be a great offer, and I would take it. But nowadays, students are not getting offers. They're driving taxi cabs. They're serving tables as waiters and waitresses. They're not getting jobs. So with all the chatter about difficulty in landing jobs upon graduation, what they're doing is they're continuing in school, and they're taking out yet more student loans. And the big question is, where is any of this going to be paid off? I'm wondering if we're going to have a QE round where they not only cover municipal bonds, but they cover student loans. I mean, wouldn't it be amazing if there was a QE initiative that says there's going to be a 25% bonus on all student loans, 25% of your volume on the loan is forgiven by a federal grant to make it easier so that after you do exit school and get a job, you won't be behind the 8 ball so badly. Okay, let's move on. It's just a very difficult situation. The economy has been stuck. I make this comment very often. It is stuck in the most vicious recession since the Great Depression. Every year we're somewhere between -3 and -5% in a recession. Every single year since 2006. Every year we claim that we have only 2% price inflation. Sometimes it's 8. Sometimes it's 6. Sometimes it's 5. Which means the lie is sometimes 6%, sometimes 4%, sometimes 3%. They're calling inflation growth. Subtract the 3, 4, or 6% from the puny 1 or 2% economic growth, and what you get is -4, -2, or -1% growth every single stinking year. We're stuck in a recession. There's no such thing as a sluggish recovery. That is fascist dictatorship mantra. You cannot work in Wall Street as an economic analyst without including sluggish recovery in your narrative. It's nothing but BS. Let's move on.
S. Walker is wanting to know, can the ECB ever stop QE? Currently, they are doing about 30 billion euros per month.
What they admit to is not actual reality. I remember the U.S. Fed was admitting to 60 billion a month, but behind the scenes it was quite clear it was more like 2 trillion a month when you count the derivatives. So their comments are really focused on sovereign bond purchases. They don't talk about the other purchases. And recently, I know I'm switching over to the Fed because it's a little bit more understood on its activity. The Fed is buying stocks, and they don't talk about that volume. The Fed is the most important stock component for demand, the stock market, S&P, Dow, NASDAQ, you name it. The Fed is not talking about their crude oil purchases. The biggest factor lifting the crude oil price above 60 right now is the Fed. They're trying to rescue the Wall Street banks from their broken and putrid energy portfolio that's dominated by shale. When it comes to the European Central Bank, they announced a good 18 months ago they're going to be purchasing corporate bonds. Well, they wrecked the sovereign bond market, so they decided it's time to wreck the corporate bond market. I mean, why would Italy, in absolute tatters with bank runs, why would their Italian government bond be operating at such low, rosy rates that compete even with the U.S. 10-year? It's because the Eurocentral Bank under Prince Draghi are buying it, or is buying it. They're buying the Spanish bonds. They're buying the Portuguese bonds. They're keeping things floating. Okay, the result of all this is that the Euro Central Bank now has $5 trillion worth of toxic paper on their balance sheet, dominated by sovereign bonds, but with an increasing amount of corporate bonds. Why would they buy a corporate bond that was doing well? Well, they want to save the system. Therefore, what they're buying is not viable, is not a healthy bond that can float on its own. In other words, they're falsifying the value of these corporate bonds. They're sitting on toxic paper. So the Euro Central Bank has $5 trillion and the U.S. Fed has $4.5 trillion. Little known is that the Fed has twice as much Fannie Mae bonds as they do U.S. Treasury bonds. So the Fed is supporting the housing market, keeping rates artificially low. And that's going to backfire in a big way. I don't know when. How long can the Euro Central Bank continue this? I don't know. Not exactly forever. They've got some new problems now with the euro too high. Over 120 is a minor problem. If it ever gets to 130, it's going to be a big problem. I remember I got into a debate with a contact from The Voice back in Central Europe. This debate was in '09. I said to him, I don't agree with you. You telling me that the Euro Central Bank will never lower its rates to match the Fed like at 1%, because you're telling me that the Euro Central Bank is more responsible and working side by side with, say, Deutsche Bank. I'm sorry, the Bundesbank, the German central bank, working side by side with the German central bank. And I don't agree with that, sir. I don't agree with it. I think that you're going to have problems in Europe with a high euro valuation. And once it gets, above 130 or 135, the Euro Central Bank will break down and bring down their interest rates so they don't lose the export trade in Europe. And that's exactly what happened. And I had to be very careful not to insult a friend of The Voice. And I learned later that he respected me even more for that disagreement, the way I expressed it and how it turned out. Currencies have a way of righting the ship and forcing policy. Currencies also have a way of distorting the ship and making the distortions uniform across the globe. That's what I think is going on now. The Euro Central Bank is in deep, deep trouble. They have to continue supporting these Southern European sovereign bonds. And an interesting phenomenon has been going on that really addresses the answer to this question. Both the German banks and the Euro Central Bank have stopped in their Italian government bond purchases and turned into net sellers. What they're essentially declaring is that the first crisis to occur in Europe, in the EU, will be in Italy. I don't know how it's going to play out, but in the last year or more, we've seen a few bank runs. We've seen some bond destruction among their bank corporate bonds. In other words, a corporate bond for a financial firm called a bank. We've seen the introduction of CoCo bonds, which put them first in line for haircuts, as they say, for bondholder losses as investors. Italy is going to be the first site. So watch them to see when the QE programs in Europe halt. I don't know if they're going to halt. I think that they're just going to get tired of supporting Italy, which refuses to follow the prescription of poison pill, like the austerity plan that Greece swallowed. Greece just did whatever the ECB and the Bundesbank and the EU Commission dictated, and the IMF. Whatever they wanted, they did it, and now it's a ravaged, wrecked country with foreign banks seizing assets and taking over their country. Italy is more proud and obstinate. My hat goes off to them, but they still don't know how to run an economy. It's pretty sad. They still got the family system. It's fun. It's almost funny what goes on in Italy. They put a son of a big industrial magnate. They put the son in charge of the company, and then he uses the whole company as kind of a private piggy bank and privilege center, and then he appoints various managers to actually run things. So you got two management systems. One is the family and one is the actual running systems. And it becomes very costly, very inefficient, and just does not work. It's part of the Italian culture. So will the ECB ever stop QE? I don't know. I think they will be forced to when they have a balance sheet. It becomes ridiculously unmanageable, and when they start fostering crises like in Italy. And these are happening now. The crisis in their balance sheet is already admitted now. You got to watch the way they express their concerns of their current status quo. All right, let's move on.
Jeffrey's wanting to know about the oil futures contract priced in yuan. Now, the launch date is March 26, 2018, so just about a week from now. So he's wanting to know, for whom will this historic policy cause significant consequential fallout? Also, in what ways will China, as well as other nations, see brighter times ahead, both financially and politically, as a result of these changes?
Significant consequential fallout is going to be that Asian nations, and I'm watching the Persian Gulf. That's the target now, because China is seeking an investment stake in Aramco. And a couple of weeks ago, we saw the Russians announce another investment stake, possibly of equal volume, in Aramco. What that means is that Russia and China will be running the Saudi Arabian oil industry. That's very important. So the consequential fallout, in my opinion, will be that Asia and the Persian Gulf are going to link at the hip, and the connective tissue will be from this RMB oil gold contract. It is possible that the Arabs will be enticed and lured into this agreement by virtue of a promise from China to sell oil to China, be paid in RMB, and they will have permission to convert a portion of that RMB into gold. In the past, the Arab nations have been converting almost 100% into U.S. Treasury bonds. That has not worked out too well for them, because a good portion turned out to be the untouchable core in the Exchange Stabilization Fund, and another portion turned out to be the Arab gold in Switzerland. So with the core in Washington and New York for the Exchange Stabilization Fund, they lost that. And with the Swiss holdings for the Arab gold, that was stolen. So now the Arabs are going to be offered a portion to be converted into gold by Chinese, along with a long list of economic development activity by China vis-a-vis Saudis. Saudi will be a showcase for the rest of the Persian Gulf. I think the Arabs are going to just jump on this opportunity, and that will cause some significant problems for the dollar monopoly. Okay, will China as well as other nations see brighter times ahead? Well, yeah, they're already starting to. There's a reverse notion. It's kind of a backward notion that the West maintains. They maintain that if you put cash in people's pockets, they'll go spend it. I mean, like handouts. In the East, they don't buy into that nonsense. It's heretical economic thought. They believe, as do the Austrian School of Economics followers, that if you do business investment, you generate legitimate income, and the entire process of construction of the businesses and the activity to produce product, even if it's service products, will result in wealth generation, which lifts the economy. In other words, the West, led by the United States and England, has lost all concept of capitalism while it adopts its socialism and wrecks its economy. The East will have beneficiaries all across the board from both the construction process and the production process for the companies that are constructed and operate on the infrastructure that is constructed. This is going to get very ugly for the West for its economic failure of policy and its disastrous emphasis on consumption. All right, let's move on.
All right, well, this is our last viewer's question. It's from S. Walker again, and they're wanting to know, will Trump succeed in bringing jobs back to America?
He's got some big obstacles. They're called Wall Street and the Pentagon. I watched his campaign closely. I don't want to get into a long discussion of the idiosyncrasies and the changes of course. But in 2016, we saw the campaign, and there was a lot of discussion of $1 trillion infrastructure program to rebuild the United States. And I have a different phrasing and terminology. It was to rebuild the United States and bring back industry, reindustrialize the United States. We have a $600 billion trade deficit. So how did all that financial engineering work out? How did all that clean financial sector emphasis work out? It was probably the most grandiose economic failure of policy in the modern era, if not the history of mankind. That's a very big statement to make. The dismantling of U.S. industry and the wreckage of the juggernaut U.S. economy is one of the greatest failures in human history. We can thank the Rockefellers, we can thank Wall Street, and we can thank the Pentagon. Instead of pursuing the reindustrialization and infrastructure development with trillion-dollar programs, Trump decided instead to follow his handlers and increase the military budget. We haven't had one lifted hand in 14 months toward infrastructure programs and initiatives to rebuild the tattered, near third world conditions in the United States. Not one hand lifted. Name one project. Instead, what we hear are secretive stories about, confiscation of wealth, bringing back, returning, repatriating foreign, U.S. gold held in foreign hands, foreign locations, hidden locations, Indonesian gold, Thailand gold, that's of U.S. ownership by the U.S. elites who refuse to bring it home. Okay, and wars fought, private wars fought, bringing down airplanes that are loaded with gold in Asia. Lots and lots of activities like that. That's what we get instead of the $1 trillion infrastructure program. Here's just a sad fact of life. If the United States goes to a legitimate gold currency, at the current $1,300 price for gold per ounce, the $600 billion trade deficit translates to about 14,000 tons of gold forfeited in the first year, or an equivalent of 70 or 80 strategic petroleum reserves in the first year. We're not ready for the gold standard because we have not fixed our industrial imbalance that causes now the $600 billion trade deficit. And that doesn't even address the $1 trillion federal deficit. We need a foreign cooperative plan, both to rebuild the infrastructure of the United States. I'm talking about port facilities, super highways for maglev trains. I'm talking about lots and lots of other things like urban train centers. You want to see an impressive area? Go to Shanghai and look at their 80 different train lines connecting other cities, all high speed. Take a look in contrast with Los Angeles, and you see nothing but smiles from the Rockefellers on gridlock with multi-lane parking lots called superhighways, interstate highways. Okay, will Trump succeed? I don't know. We got to get Wall Street and the Pentagon out of the room. And they're still running things. I challenge Trump and his staff before 2018 ends. Will you do a single deed to rebuild the infrastructure and at the same time encourage the formation of 30,000 new businesses per year? Will you do a single deed before your first term is halfway done? I don't think they're going to do jack shit. We're more likely to start another war, increase military budget, and make the shareholders of McDonnell Douglas and Grumman very happy. We got ass-backward priorities in the United States leadership. There's a lot of talk that the elites in the United States, that there's going to be like $1 trillion in asset confiscation. Well, that sounds really nice. If you confiscate one elite person's $100 billion, you confiscate it. Is it in the form of cash to offset the U.S. government debt? No, it's in the form of assets that you cannot easily sell. So I don't think this $1 trillion supposed confiscation of assets by Trump for the elite, military tribunal, executive orders, all rolled into one. I don't think it's going to relieve our trade deficit or our government fiscal deficit that's accumulated now 21 trillion. The impression across the world now is that the United States will never pay off its 21 trillion. That's one of the factors behind the bond market distress. What they're saying is, the foreigners are saying in equivalent terms is, we now expect the U.S. government to default in some form. My guess is in a restructured debt situation, like 30% cut, the same as the percentage for a new dollar. Will Trump succeed? I'm beginning to think not. He might have a setback in November with the midterm elections because the fascists are using all kinds of devices, I don't want to get into details, in order to take control of the Congress with the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party, in my opinion, now is the fascist party. The Republican Party, in my opinion, is now the populist party. So the fascists, whether there's some Republicans who are still the neocon fascist types. If I had to make a percentage guess, I would say of the U.S. Congress, it's about 75% fascist and 25% populist, which includes the Tea Party. I don't care about Republican and Democrat. I care about the neocon acceptance and the fascist rule compliance. I don't think Trump is going to succeed. I think he has too many obstacles. When I hear people say, well, after the first term, Trump will have cleaned up the swamp and the fascists will be in jail and they'll be having their assets confiscated. And I say, well, what world do you live in, clown? We have had the narco presidents in rule, in office, in the White House since '88 with Papa Bush. 4 years of Papa Bush, but he really had the Reagan presidency for 7 of the 8 years under control because Papa Bush had Reagan shot and debilitated. So we had 4 years of Papa Bush, 8 years of Clinton, 8 years of Baby Bush, 8 years of Obama. That's a collective 28 years of fascist rule, the narco presidency, as it will be told in the history books in the future. The narco president rule. It's all fascist. Headlined by, corporate merger with the government, like Wall Street banks. Headlined by constant war and huge budgets to the military-industrial complex. And headlined by impunity, except for, fines that banks pay. It just ends up as shareholder costs. I think we need 10 years to clean up the fascists in Washington. But what I like to see is this new pattern of forced resignations, like with Ryan and Pelosi has not been seen in quite a while. I'd like to see, many, many more. I don't want to get into a lot of names. I'd like to see 100 of these neocon clowns forced into retirement. I don't want to see them replaced by a Langley agent in street clothes who wins a congressional seat. We need 10 years to clean this up. It's not going to be done in 2, not even remotely in 2. And very little progress will be seen in 4 years. Look at all the opposition that Trump has in the Congress and in the press. Will Trump succeed? Probably not. Not in the first term. We still have a colossal drain of jobs for the U.S. We're doing all the wrong things. It's sad what's going on in the country. We have political leaders saying that they have the right to confiscate your income, your hard-earned money. The right. No, we have the right as people for our government to create economic conditions favorable for job growth. And we don't see it. We haven't seen it ever since 9/11. We haven't seen it for a long, long time. Oh, why don't you ask me how people can find the hat trick letter?
Definitely. Well, that was our last viewer's question, Jim, and we really appreciate you coming on today. Did you want to share with the viewers where they can find you?
Yeah, it's www.goldenjackass.com. I actually had a contact us message from a follower who said, I looked for your free newsletter that you talked about with your radio show recently, and I couldn't find it. I only found a request for a subscription. Well, that's it. Okay, the goldenjackass.com site has a free section. The free section includes interviews and public articles, and only that, interviews and public articles. I don't have repeat interviews unless they have a link. I also come out with about a once per month public article. That's what you find in the free area, the public domain portion of the Golden Jackass website. However, it is all promotional toward the newsletter. I mean, there's an educational side. Sure, there's a missionary element to my work. I want the people to be uplifted in their knowledge of economics and finance. I want them to know about the problems with the banks and the problems with the currencies and the inevitable return of the gold standard on a global stage. I want that. Okay, but I also want people to sign up for the newsletter because it's what I do. It's my work. The newsletter is called the Hat Trick Letter, and right now there is a single report that is offered each month, and it's called the Global Reset and Gold Report. It features the end of the petrodollar. It features the rise of the Eurasian trade zone. It features the return of the gold standard. I'm working on the March report right now. It's well along. And it should be posted in the next several days, like probably less than a week. But I got more work to do. So I hope people go to the website, bounce around with the free material, and sign up for the Hat Trick Letter which is the newsletter. It is a paid publication. Thanks for having me on, Elijah. I enjoy your interviews more than most. I've got a few that are my favorite, and you're one of them. There's always a good response. You seem to have a very fine following, and I'm glad that 3 years ago we started together, because you've done well, and I'm really happy for you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jim. And yeah, like I said in our last interview, I think you're our most popular guest among all the guests we've had on. Your interviews get the most views. Whenever I ask for questions, we get way too many that we can't even cover all of them. So thank you once again for joining us, and joining us every time you do.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me on. Bye now.